Hi everyone, welcome back to Dadsplaining Politics.
Welcome back. It is Friday, the 13th of June. A massive thing happened this morning. Obviously, Israel has attacked Iran and quite close to Tehran. Some of the attacks happen within Tehran. We'll get into that in a bit, but we're going to start with the LA riots. Then we're going to get into the Air India crash that happened only yesterday, I think it was. And then we're going to get into obviously the attack that just happened early this morning, Australia time. And then we're going to get into AUKUS and its future, which we've talked about a bit in the past. But do you want to start us off with everything that's been happening in LA? Because you're
Oh,
going
sure.
there in a week or so.
In a few
Interesting
weeks' time.
timing, I might add. God.
Yes, so there's been all sorts of riots in LA from the undocumented immigrants and people in South LA and in Central LA in the CBD, the downtown area. Trump has implemented the National Guard together with several hundred Marines, 700 Marines and 4,000 National Guard. And interestingly, he didn't ask for Gavin Newsom's approval, the governor of California, nor the mayor of Los Angeles, which is constitutionally what he needs to do. And so the Californians have now sued the White House for doing that, breaking the Constitution. And so that's now in a process of appeal, etc. Uh, but the unrest is such that they put a curfew in place each night in downtown LA to stop the rioting and the looting, etc. But it's a very unstable situation with lots of political implications.
Yeah, it definitely is. I want to just add in a little thing there. You said that the riots were just undocumented immigrants and stuff. I just want to add in that it's not just them. It's a massive
Regular citizens.
proportion of regular citizens and people who have, basic common sense and who are interested politically and understand their rights and maybe are passionate about what America has always deemed itself to be, and they want to retain their freedoms in that way, their freedoms to protest, their freedoms to express their opinions. So obviously they're trying to retain that in some way. It's only getting worse and worse. I don't know if there's a situation in which political riots have been stifled by sending in a National Guard to intimidate and further humiliate and hurt people. I think that that will only worsen the anger and the fury felt in California, which obviously, as a very democratic state, is already at the opposite end of the political spectrum to everything that Trump believes in. So, Governor Newsom has said some really good clapbacks at Trump over the past few days, and it's interesting to see their rivalry continue, especially as we talked about when the US election was happening. He would have been one of the potential Democratic candidates if the Democrats had run, candidacy elections rather than just putting forward Kamala Harris for the role. So,
And I think he is a candidate for the next, presidential election. What's interesting is politically, this will actually play very well for Trump across the US because this was his mandate to the US people that he get tough on immigration. Let me finish, really. Get tough on immigration and
I'm letting you finish. I didn't say
extradition. But I
anything.
thought you were going to say something.
I wasn't saying anything. I was listening.
Undocumented immigrants, etc. The challenge is they're targeting also people who are mowing lawns and working in factories, etc. And kids are scared to go to school in case their parents are arrested whilst they're at school and stuff. So it's being executed in a very cruel way, which is the interesting political thing. I read today the fascinating thing that Newsom is actually hoping to be arrested by the National Guard because that will cement his ability to become a future president of the US because he'll become a martyr for the democratic cause. So it's very interesting the political nuances here and where it will end or how long it will go on.
I also think it's important to just think about like the basic destruction of people's lives that's happening, not just the political impact that it's happening.
Hmm.
Like I think that's where the danger happens. That's why people like Trump get into power and, make actions like this because they begin to think of these people as a scourge to get rid of rather than people who are living actual human lives. And when what, like 10% of a population is undocumented, what are you planning on doing? The systems don't exist to get rid of 10% of the population, and the labor market will not be able to retain its stability if you get rid of all these crucial workers. So obviously there's that aspect of it. And then there's also the aspect that these ICE raid, the National Guard have been targeting everyday regular people unnecessarily. Obviously, we both saw, everyone saw, them target the Australian journalist who was simply reporting at the scene of one of the protests, and the camera was actually pointed in her direction, and you can clearly see one of the soldiers point his gun in her direction and shoot her intentionally, even though it's very clear that she is part of the media. And
Yeah.
in what world is, a democratic country telling its soldiers to target journalists from the country of one of its closest allies? I mean, I know Hegseth, for example, can't name any American allies except Australia. I think he can name Japan, Australia, UK, and I don't think he knows any more countries other than that, to be honest. But if you're targeting one of your closest allies, or what you deem to be one of your closest allies, what's going wrong? Like, clearly there's some miscommunication happening there. And it's like a complete
But I
embarrassment
don't think the
to the
National
rest of
Guard
the world.
soldier knew that it was an Australian, maybe knew it was a journalist, didn't know it was an Australian
You
journalist.
know, it's a war crime to target media and
Yes,
journalists.
I
It's
agree.
disgusting. 10 years
Yeah.
ago, if something like that had happened, it would have like, if let's say a Spanish, um, like a Spanish army guy had shot an American journalist. If they were in Spain, I think that the tourism to Spain from America would go down by like 50%. It
Yeah.
would Spain would impose sanctions. Like, I don't know. I think a ridiculous number
Yeah,
of things would
it is
happen in
ridiculous.
response to that. We can't accept this as the new normal, right? It is extreme behavior, and you can't just go along with it and say, oh, well, it was an accident. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know who he was shooting at. You don't shoot at the media, and you don't shoot unprovoked. She wasn't anywhere near them. She wasn't coming towards them. She wasn't acting aggressively. Why would you shoot someone? Even if they were dressed in protester gear, if they weren't directly attacking you, why are you defending yourself? Right?
Can't defend it. It's just crazy, crazy
Of
stuff. And the other
course.
crazy thing that happened was there was a Democrat senator who went in with the deputy defense secretary, a woman who was there, and then the National Guard arrested him and pushed him out and handcuffed him, this Democratic senator. And then the deputy defense secretary came out and sort of apologized and said he should have identified himself. We didn't know, and la la la. So tensions are high on both sides here, and it will be very interesting how long it goes on, as I say.
I mean, yeah, of course. This is just a test, though. As I think Governor Newsom has even pointed out, or other, really high-profile Democratic senators, this is a test for the rest of America. They're using California as a training ground to see how people respond to, like ICE and the National Guard coming in and taking over, imposing curfews, imposing incredibly autocratic type measures. And this is all followed up by Trump having a military parade
Mhm.
on the day of his birthday, which I know you smile, but I'm starting to not see many differences between him and Mao and him and, Kim Jong Un.
Putin,
So,
Putin, Putin and Macron, he loves a military parade, that's why he loved the French parade and he likes what Moscow.
no US president has ever
Yeah.
done a military parade for their birthday. It's
Mhm.
not in like the
But he used
tenets
the
of
excuse that
American.
he used the excuse it was the 250th anniversary of the armed forces as well.
Yes,
So
and
it
it's an
happens to be on his
excuse.
birthday.
You said it to yourself. It's an
Mhm.
excuse.
Yeah.
So, This is just the end of America. The
Crazy,
fascist
crazy
regime
times. Yeah.
is taking control. All the, I don't know if you've seen this, but all the academic experts in fascism at all of the top universities are warning everyone to get out, telling them it's better to leave sooner rather than later if we look back to what happened. No, but seriously, I know you're laughing, but they're genuinely saying that the fascism experts who have
Right.
deeply studied what happened in Nazi Germany are telling people to leave.
Mhm.
It's not something to laugh about. It's not, it's like, this isn't merely just the right wing. This is, autocracy. This is the beginning of a potential dictatorship.
I
And he
still
is,
contend there's a long way to go to that in the US,
but
telling.
this is a massive step closer.
Oh yeah, it's not good. I agree. I'm not defending it.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the terrible Air India crash?
We can, but I also want to say as well, that I've seen that just before we move on to that, that I've seen that there's going to be mass protests held on the day that Trump is doing his mass military parade. So we'll see what the turnout is for that, and I think that that could be a turning point in the pushback from the rest of America, because obviously from now from since the election has happened, we haven't seen that much pushback. It feels like the Democrats and everyone else have been in disarray, unsure of how to deal with Trump and his administration. So that could be the beginning
Could be.
of,
I still
a
feel like
defense of their beliefs.
I still feel like the disarray will continue for some time, but just
All
wait.
right. You better hope that it doesn't, because you're going to LA in a few weeks, and as far as it looks right now, this will still be happening, and it'll be a really dangerous place to be.
Won't be
So
in downtown, let me tell you. Um, uh, so let's
you're
move
not
on.
safe. No one's safe. That's what's terrifying about this,
Mhm.
because they're not targeting anyone specifically. They're targeting anyone who happens to be in the wrong place,
Yeah.
the wrong time. Anyway, yep, let's move on.
Terrible Air India crash from Ahmedabad to Gatwick in London.
Hmm.
All passengers dead apart from
Apart from
one
one guy.
Indian citizen in 11A. So he's got to feel like the luckiest person on earth. And now I hear that everyone is looking at changing seats to 11A because perhaps it's the safest seat on the plane. But just a shocking thing, the plane took off and then didn't seem to gain altitude. The landing gear was still down, so who knows what the issue was, but clearly some
Mm,
sort of catastrophic failure, not being able to gain altitude, and simply it crashed into some buildings. And there's probably going to be many more killed in the buildings, etc. I was talking to a friend today who's from India and was saying a lot of students are
many
in
more
that.
killed. The death toll is going to
The death
increase, you
toll,
mean?
yeah, the death toll. So shocking.
Yeah, that was really shocking. I know as well, I'm not sure how lucky this guy would be feeling right now, knowing that everyone aboard this plane that he was on a pretty traumatic
I
experience,
think his
right?
brother was on the plane and died, so
Yeah, and to go through something like that and to look around yourself and see everyone around you, lifeless, and then to have to navigate that and escape. And I know that the pilot put out a Mayday signal, but there was nothing you can do at that point if the the gear wasn't even working on the planes to give them elevation. It's just another Boeing catastrophe. It's another hit to their reputation, and I think, you know, people need to
the
start looking into that a
787 has
bit more.
actually been a very safe plane. There hasn't really been any other crashes with the 787,
Yes,
so
and it's convenient that their media people put out reports on that, whereas let's look at Boeing as a whole and the difficulties they've had as a construction company and compare them to other companies rather than
Mhm.
comparing this one particular plane with other planes. Do you know what I mean? Because
Anyway, it'll be fully investigated, and I'm not flying Air India anytime soon.
you should be
Um,
careful about Boeing entirely, I
mm.
think. I would
um,
advise that.
so yeah, terrible stuff, and our thoughts go out to all the relatives of the people who have died. It's awful, and it really
Hmm.
brings it home to you when you fly around a bit. You think to yourself, particularly for nervous flyers amongst us.
I'm a nervous flyer. He's
Um,
he's talking about me.
So let's move on to Israel's attack on Iran. Would you like to lead off, Freddie?
Yeah, of course. So I think around 10:42 this morning, um, we got we started to get news reports of what was happening in Tehran. So over the past few days, a lot of media outlets have put out articles on the potential of an Israeli attack because the US has withdrawn nearly all their diplomats and lots of army personnel from the region in the past few days and, started evacuating people. So it was clear signs that attack was going to be staged in the next few days. Israel then launched an attack on a various number of nuclear sites and also the headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard, which is one of the main military like branches of the government in Iran. And the head of the Revolutionary Guard is now presumed dead. Multiple nuclear scientists are presumed dead. And Netanyahu is saying that attacks will continue until the problem is solved. How arbitrary that sounds, we all know. But yeah, that's basically the update. If you want to add some
Well,
stuff.
I think yes, there was a report from the global nuclear watchdog that I think was Israel's excuse to supposedly publicly do this. That is, they were closer to having a nuclear weapon, so Israel's always said they're not going to tolerate that. So they attacked the nuclear facility, and now are preparing for a response from Iran. So that will be probably happen in the next 24 or 48 hours on Israel. Yes, but it's a scary situation already adding to a already terrible situation in the Middle East and this part of this world. Yes, watch this space, I suppose, to see what's going to happen.
I mean, I have a lot more to say about it. So watch this space right now because I think we have to really listen to the people that we respect in foreign affairs around the world and listen to what they're saying that this was a dangerous escalation because of course it was. Because yes, Iran has potential to have nuclear weapons. They have a lot of academia in this area. They have experts in how to build nuclear weapons, and they have a knowledge base that's very strong and very difficult to dismantle. There's only so many nuclear scientists you can kill. You can't target all the information. And so it seems like an unsolvable problem for Israel, right? Because Iran has this information. You can't kill information. It lives on. So
Mhm.
they can do as much harm as they can to the missile bunkers,
Yep.
sources, whatever you say, the factories. But there are so many of them deeply embedded in mountains, in rock, that to access them you would need incredibly powerful bombs, such as only the US can provide. And as of this moment, the US has said they had nothing to do with the attack, and it was a unilateral action
By Israel.
by Israel because obviously they don't want to be targeted. The US wants to take themselves out of it. Trump
Yep.
doesn't want any wars.
Yep.
So he doesn't want Iran possibly taking retaliation on the US or any US army. Although, air raids have been heard throughout Israel, I think, today. So they're preparing for a retaliation. And we're going to see what happens. And it's truly quite terrifying because if they do potentially have the capacity to have a nuclear missile and they were close to reaching it, how do we know that they haven't already reached that point and they haven't already developed the nuclear missile? How far has, Israeli intelligence gone? And the retaliation could be absolutely disastrous. But I suppose it's a risk that Netanyahu is willing to take the lives of everyone in the region, in his own country, in Iran, just for the sake of security. When, I might add, there was meant to be a conference coming up in the next week or so on nuclear deproliferation, on increasing the agreements and transparency of Iran's nuclear operation. So the
Right.
diplomatic avenue was available to be taken. That was a path, that was an option, and they went the other way.
Yeah.
And it's a very clear message to the world.
It's
Anyway,
a,
now I'm
it,
done.
the analogy is, which seems like a super blunt instrument by the Israelis, this concept of destroying things, destroying Hamas, destroying the nuclear thing. It just seems like a rather naive view to me, right? Because it's like you were saying, it's difficult to destroy all the scientists who have this knowledge and they
Mm.
simply replace it with, North Korean missiles and nuclear stuff. I mean, it's a little crazy, really.
Yeah, even taking all the emotion out of it, if you look at the straight facts of the situation, you, again, like we talked about when all of this began happening, you can't kill an idea. The idea
Yeah.
lives on. And when you cause people pain and harm, they want to get revenge. Especially in the Middle East, they've, the rhetoric that people have raised on is to blame Israel or to blame Iran, and they're raised with this sense of hatred for other people in the region. And so when something bad happens to you, you think the way to fix it is by retaliating. So yeah, it's a really terrifying situation. Everyone should be quite concerned.
Yeah.
Should be worried about what's going to happen following, and pray for all the innocent people who may be caught in the crossfire, because
Agreed.
yeah.
Agreed. So on the nuclear theme, let's move finally to AUKUS, the AUKUS agreement. So the Trump administration has said they're going to review the AUKUS agreement.
Mm.
And some of the analysis of that is perhaps linked to Hegseth asking the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister that Australia should increase its defence spending from its current 2.3% to 3.5%, which is just crazy amount of money, right? In the no way the budget. And Richard Miles seemed to be, yes, we'll consider that, whereas Albo was very much, no, we will decide how much we spend on defense, not some other country. And
Mm.
so it's fascinating. I see it probably just as a negotiating tactic by the US. And the other big issue here, which I've always said about AUKUS, if you've heard on previous episodes, it's dependent upon the US having the industrial base to produce enough submarines per year in order to meet their own requirements. And if they don't do that, they don't ship any submarines to Australia. And Malcolm Turnbull was very eloquent on this on 7:30 last night, that he doesn't think it's going to happen. They're not even meeting their requirements to meet their own. They're way off it. And so we'll probably end up with no submarines. So I'm hopeful that in this whole negotiation, it actually scuttles the whole thing, because I think we need to start thinking about a plan B, and investing the money in long-range bombers and missiles, and using a porcupine strategy to defend Australia, and then having the American nuclear submarines based in Perth. That's part of the agreement, but just forgetting about these submarines, because I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Well, obviously, I completely agree, because I think that we've talked about that exact topic before. Before Malcolm even said it the other day, I think we've actually discussed that topic even before he very nicely enunciated it. So yeah, obviously we have been in the situation for a while. Albo's been stuck in an agreement that was not negotiated by him, that was negotiated by Scott Morrison. Obviously he has to respect it, because yes, the US is one of our traditional allies, etc. And it builds upon Five Eyes. So when AUKUS is at risk, it really calls into question the Five Eyes intelligence agreement, which is the agreement that Australia has with, New Zealand, Canada,
Canada,
UK,
yeah.
US. That of which Japan has asked to join a number of times, I'm fairly sure. But yeah, so it's called into question that, even because if we're willing to share, the entire breadth of our intelligence gathering with the US, and they're not willing to share anything with us, especially as the administration's foreign policy is very unclear and doesn't respect Australian defense in any way. Maybe we need to rethink that as well. It feels like it's time to start from scratch in terms of the
I
US.
agree. I think
Abandon ship.
it's time for a rethink of the whole thing. And again, I get frustrated with stupid Angus Taylor, who's the opposition defense spokesperson now, saying, Albo needs to be having a meeting with Trump. Have they not watched any of these terrible meetings in the Oval Office? The last thing Albo should want
Mm,
is to request a meeting in the Oval Office where Trump's going to try and screw him to spend more on defense. Much better to have a meeting on the sidelines of the G7 in Canada, not in
I
the Oval
know.
Office. I mean, strategically, so that's why I simply don't understand these harping on about having this Oval Office meeting with Trump. Have they not read anything or looked at
Well, it's
anything?
tiring that the opposition doesn't have any real arguments anymore. I miss the days when they had, they still do have some intelligent thinkers who can raise a good argument and know what they're talking about, but it feels like a lot of their arguments just come from nowhere and feel like unbiased and without any explanation. But people will like suck it up and they will listen to what Angus Taylor has to say and they'll be like, yeah, yeah, why doesn't he have a meeting with Trump? Even if from a foreign policy perspective it doesn't make any sense, they just want to get the viewing
I
numbers, I
I was
suppose.
happy to I was happy to hear Malcolm last night also say, when asked that question about Albo, saying Albo is a very skilled politician and a very
Mm,
experienced prime minister, and he's just come off a huge victory. If anyone can have a good discussion and manage and survive such a meeting, it's Albo in this situation, right? He's coming with the full support of the Australian people.
that's
And
very
so he
true.
doesn't really need to put up with any shit, just like Carney didn't put up with any shit and had a good result. So.
I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how he deals with it and to see the fallout from that. It's a bit weird of the Trump administration to be gambling with something that, as I've mentioned before, is incredibly supported by the American public on both sides of politics. Both Democrats and Republicans alike support the AUKUS agreement. So it's bizarre. Have they run out
So
of
you know
things to
why?
argue about?
But you know
Have they
why I think
run
it
out of
is?
statements to
It,
make?
no, it's not Trump's deal. So he wants to put his fingerprints on it and get a better deal for the US. He wants Australia to pay a few more billion. You see what I mean? And so that's what I think this is all about.
In what world would we do that?
You'd be crazy. We would be totally crazy to do
It
that.
would be insane. It would be a laughing stock,
Yep.
especially in years to come when you look back on this period of time and you think, God,
Yeah,
clearly, like, they should have
agreed.
known better.
So we'll know by next week's episode of Dad's Planning Politics how Albo goes. So look out for that.
Yeah.
Shall we conclude there, Freddie?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Yes, obviously a lot has happened. I'm hoping the world is looking a little less dire next week, when we meet again. We have some positive news to share with you. Maybe we can start a segment where we add in some positive
Yes, that's a good
information.
idea. Well, have a great
Yeah.
weekend, everyone, and thank you for watching. And of course, tell all your friends and like and support us. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye.